The NHL season is just around the corner, kicking off with a doubleheader between Buffalo and New Jersey in the capital of the Czech Republic, Prague, on October 4 to 5th. Therefore, as we approach the start of the new hockey year, I have decided, as usual, to walk you through all the changes that happened in NHL teams over the summer. We'll see who got stronger, who weakened, and who shuffled their lineup to the point of being unrecognizable, as we try to predict what awaits each NHL team in the upcoming season. This is the NHL season preview. Today, we'll start with last season's tightest division, the Metropolitan. Now's the time to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into all the changes. Columbus had a bad season and firmly settled at the bottom of the division. It was obvious that the club had hit a dead end with no clear direction visible. You can change players, change coaches, but Columbus made perhaps the most important move over the summer. They changed their general manager. Yes, Don Waddell can be blamed for the fact that Carolina hasn't been able to reach the Stanley Cup final, but at least he built a clear system there, aligning players to the head coach's vision. In Columbus, logical decisions were replaced by poor ones. Good players didn't stay long, young talents left as soon as they grew a bit, prospects didn't develop, and some players openly clashed with management. Columbus clearly needed to start rebuilding from the top, and they made that step. Yes. The situation with Johnny Gaudreau leaves the Blue Jackets without a leader and a reliable first-line player. There weren't many acquisitions either. The most notable is Sean Monahan, but he was mainly brought in to pair with Gaudreau. They had great chemistry together in Calgary. Additionally, they signed 37-year-old veteran Jack Johnson on defense, but that's more like patching holes rather than strengthening the team. The same could be said about former Montreal defenseman Jordan Harris, but thanks to him, they managed to do the impossible, get rid of Patrick Lane. Ohio has a huge pool of young players, some of whom, like Cole Sillinger, have already been extended. But who among the youth has truly turned into a star recently? I don't have an answer yet, though maybe over the next year we'll see someone like Adam Fantilli, or finally give David Jiricek some playing time. I don't think Columbus should be expected to make serious progress, and for now, this team is still likely to finish last in the Metropolitan Division. But at least they've changed their management and their coach. Dean Evason is a pretty strict coach, and Columbus played their best hockey last season when the players were simply allowed to play freely, like when the Russian line was comfortable and Fantilli's mistakes were forgiven. In its current state, Columbus is not capable of competing for a playoff spot, and their roster is far from championship quality. However, with such a large pool of prospects, it would be a waste not to give them a chance. In theory, Columbus can play fun and attractive hockey regardless of the results. Whether Evason will loosen the reins remains to be seen. At the very least, I don't see this team or its roster sticking to a rigid system. Columbus, in my opinion, hasn't become stronger, but they shouldn't be seen as a spineless punching bag or just another game on the schedule. Personally, I believe there will be at least some positive momentum under Waddell and Evason, and from the large youth camp that has accumulated in the Blue Jackets system over the years. Since we are reviewing teams based on last season's standings, next up is New Jersey, a team that magically passed the Rangers a year ago but failed miserably to make the playoffs this season. Of course, Devils fans can rightfully point to the insane number of injuries on the roster, and I completely understand that. Last year, it seemed like only the laziest player didn't get hurt in New Jersey, and it had an impact. Jack Hughes, who theoretically could have had a Hart Trophy-level season, got injured, recovered, played brilliantly, and then got injured again. Dougie Hamilton was out for the entire season. Add to that minor injuries for Nico Hischier, Timo Meier, Andre Palat, a concussion for Jonas Siegenthaler, Tomas Nosek missing half the season, and so on. Ideally, the Devils don't need to overhaul their roster much. They just need to stay healthy. Although the club did solve its key issue over the summer, a solid, reliable goaltender. Akira Schmid can have hot streaks for 3 games, but then he inevitably drops back to an AHL level. Vitek Vanecek won't be a consistent #1 goalie either. However, Jacob Markstrom, now that's a different story. New Jersey grabbed the best goalie on the market, and with him, the team looks like a much more serious contender. On top of that, they shook up Carolina by acquiring the defensive and committed Brett Pesce, along with the useful Stefan Noesen, although in my opinion they overpaid him a bit, but oh well. Plus, they brought in Dylan, added Tomas Tatar, so they worked really well over the summer in Newark, while also shedding some dead weight. In my opinion, the Devils have definitely become stronger, and theoretically, this team could be one of the major surprises of the season. If Hughes stays healthy, he's already a 100-point candidate. By the way, his younger brother recently got injured too, but never mind. If Hamilton stays healthy, he's a solid #1 defenseman with a pace for 70 to 80 points. If Markstrom plays the way he should, he'll be at the top goaltender level in the league. I'm not too fond of New Jersey's center depth with Eric Haula and Curtis Lazar at the bottom, but that's just nitpicking. Everything seems good, but here's a fly in the ointment. The biggest change for New Jersey is on the coaching staff. Personally, I'm skeptical about the hiring of Sheldon Keefe, and I don't buy the excuses about the non-championship roster of Toronto. Toronto made the playoffs not from the lower seeds or the wild card spots, but Keefe only took them past the first round once. For now, Keefe's appointment seems like more of a minus than a plus to me, but we'll see what the season brings. He has a mix of experience and youth to work with, although this youth is not completely green. There's no one on the team who hasn't smelled the powder. The roster is definitely playoff caliber, and honestly, it's good enough to aim for the top 3 in the division. And by the way, I'd be interested to hear what longtime New Jersey fans think. What are your thoughts on the Keefe hire? Do you believe in him? Next up is the team that will be buzzing in your ears all season long, one you'll hear about from every corner, Philadelphia. Yes, because of Matvei Michkov, of course. The NHL's PR machine has already started working hard for him, so in the first month, every move he makes will be scrutinized under a microscope. But objectively speaking, Michkov is indeed the main intrigue for the club this season, simply because nothing else has changed. Yes, Gurionov and Atkinson left the club, but those aren't major losses. Veteran Mark Stahl retired, Carter Hart wasn't playing much and still won't be. So it's the same Philadelphia we've seen before. I won't go into John Tortorella's methods, but in my opinion, the team was already worn out by him midway through last season. Usually, Tortorella's teams reach some sort of peak before falling apart, but the Flyers crashed much earlier. I made a big video about this last season, feel free to check it out. The only fresh blood for the Flyers is Michkov, there's no one else, although I'm equally curious to see if Jamie Drysdale has developed. He played last season with an injury, had surgery in the spring, and is ready to make a comeback. Objectively, Philadelphia's roster doesn't seem playoff caliber. With all due respect to Sean Couturier, he's not a #1 center on a team aiming for anything serious. The team's center depth as a whole is lacking, and they have a considerable group of young players who aren't developing. Sure, Owen Tippett has improved significantly, but similar progress is expected from Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee, Noah Cates, Tyson Forster, Bobby Brink, Cam York, and others. Additionally, I'm not optimistic about the goaltending situation. Samuel Ersson was decent in spots, but whether he can grow into a #1 goalie is still a question. We've seen too little of Ivan Fedotov to draw any conclusions, and Alexei Kolosov has already left Philadelphia. Will Tortorella manage to keep this team in line for another season? Will Michkov be a bright spot with 50-60 points, or will it turn out to be more complicated? And what will the Flyers ultimately do with their awful power play, which has been nearly hopeless for the past 3 to 4 years? There are many questions, and personally, my answers lean toward the negative. Before last season, I said Philadelphia wouldn't make the playoffs, and with some twists and turns, that prediction came true. A year later, my expectations for the club haven't changed much. If the Flyers manage to fight for a playoff spot, it would be a pleasant surprise. If not, it'll be the expected reality. Next up is Pittsburgh, who had quite the season last year. Pittsburgh wasted time, woke up toward the end, but still didn't make the wild card. A systematic first-round exit led the Penguins to miss the playoffs at the very last moment. Then it led to a bad season and a desperate chase for the wild card with their tongues hanging out. But none of this resulted in the right conclusions. Pittsburgh isn't getting stronger, and the excuse that the club just doesn't have room to maneuver is nonsense. How much more does Crosby have to score at 37 years old, earning $8.7 million, 120 points, maybe 140? No other NHL team has such a productive veteran who isn't dragging down the payroll. It's often said that Pittsburgh is the only team in the NHL that can easily build the best bottom 12 from its system. That's probably true. There are certainly enough players to fill those bottom 4 lines, but that doesn't make them playoff contenders. And this summer, Pittsburgh picked up more bottom-tier players, Hayes, Lizotte, Glass. From the positive acquisitions, I'd highlight the defensive pair of Sebastian Aho and Matt Grzelcyk. The club lost Jake Gensel and traded him for a relatively low return, benefiting Jake more than themselves. I don't think Pittsburgh got weaker this summer, and I could say the same about the last 4 to 5 off seasons, but they didn't get stronger either. It was another summer of treading water, signing cheap, low-quality players for the bottom lines. That said, I don't think the club has a disastrous goalie tandem. At least last season, Jerry and Nedeljkovic both looked decent. With a core of Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Carlson, the team can call that their core, but in reality, there's only one true core left. The number of mistakes and defensive lapses from Letang has now overshadowed his diminishing offensive output. Malkin seems to have aged a bit faster than expected. Carlson isn't delivering the impact they hoped for, but all these players are crucial for the power play, which was a disaster for Pittsburgh last season. For Philadelphia, it might be due to a lack of skilled players, but for Pittsburgh, it was surprising. If Sullivan and his assistants managed to improve the 5-on-4 power play format even a little, that would already be a good help for the Penguins. And, of course, there's particular interest in Rutger McGroarty. I still believe Pittsburgh made a mistake in the long run by giving up Jaeger, but if the goal is to win now, then McGroarty indeed fits better. He's looked good in the preseason and could even start the season in the top 6. Overall, as much as I want to believe in Pittsburgh, the team hasn't taken a step forward. Yes, finding options in their situation was truly difficult, which is why we have yet another version of reshuffling the bottom lines and another year added to the leaders' ages. Right now, I don't see how the club can realistically fight for a playoff spot, though I'd love to be proven wrong. Next up is Washington, who sensationally made the playoffs only to be quickly swept out by the Rangers. However, the summer for the Capitals can definitely be considered a success. At least, there was a lot of movement in all directions. Yes, records are important, but this offseason shows me that the club isn't just focused on Ovechkin's goal tally. To begin with, they got rid of chronically injured players like Max Pacioretty and chronically underperforming ones like Darcy Kuemper. Then they added Thompson, Mangiapane, Chychrun, Duhaime, Matt Roy, and even Pierre-Luc Dubois. While there were no flashy superstar acquisitions, the team's look will definitely change. The goalie tandem of Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren is super cheap, but both have already proven themselves in a positive light. A long-term contract for Matt Roy looks like a gradual soft replacement for first defenseman John Carlson. There's also an option for the power play with Jakob Chychrun, who continues to alternate between good and bad seasons. Andrew Mangiapane also performs inconsistently. Duhaime and Taylor Radish look like solid depth additions, but the main intrigue, of course, is around Dubois. It's quite debatable how Los Angeles saw him as Anze Kopitar's replacement, and it's likely that Dubois' decline is partly due to not being able to handle the psychological pressure. At 26, Dubois is still relatively young, but right now, Washington seems like almost his last chance to salvage his career and reputation. Washington is definitely taking a risk. Essentially, they are risking ending up with another Evgeny Kuznetsov, a player with a big contract and potential leadership, but who isn't delivering results worthy of the money. However, if we look for something common among Washington's acquisitions, it's that each new player has shown they can perform well, but they all do it inconsistently. If Dubois can be rebooted, if Chychrun plays at his top level, if Lindgren performs like he did last spring, and if Mangiapane scores 25-plus goals, the Capitals could hit the jackpot. The chances that all of them have a great season at once are slim, but even if just a couple do, that's already a win. Meanwhile, there's still the question hanging over TJ Oshie. Will he play? And does the team even need him to? In recent years, we've gotten used to calling Washington a team of old-timers. But do you know who is older on average right now than Washington? Teams like the young and developing Detroit and, surprisingly, Chicago. Plus, let's not forget players like Connor McMichael, Aliaksei Protas, Sonny Milano, and Hendrix Lapierre, who still have room to grow. Even Dylan Strome could theoretically take another step forward. And of course, Ovechkin. How could we forget him? He hit 30 goals last season, and I think from now on, his pace should be judged by that number each year. Yes, his supporting cast for setting up goals around him has diminished, and as he ages, he needs them more than ever. There's no other elite finisher on the team, but personally, I like this Washington. If the team can fix their disastrous -36 goal differential to something more acceptable, we could very well see them make the playoffs. The club did excellent work over the summer, strengthening every line. Whether it will work or not is secondary to me. The main thing is they found solutions and took action. Some teams this summer could definitely learn a thing or two from Washington. Take, for example, the New York Islanders, who, with each passing year, are increasingly turning into Lou Lamoriello's tomb. The club doesn't make moves in the summer, doesn't make moves at the trade deadline, and it feels like they've become a kind of mummified, preserved entity. It doesn't matter if they lose in Game 7 of the conference finals, get knocked out in the first round, or don't make the playoffs at all. Nothing changes. Over the years, the team has gradually become one of the oldest in the NHL. And this is despite the fact that the club supposedly doesn't want to keep the hard-hitting duo of Matt Martin and Cal Clutterbuck, who for years made the Islanders' fourth line the most physical in the NHL. Clutterbuck has been told no for sure, while Martin was only invited to camp on a tryout contract. The Islanders continue to rely on their brilliant goaltending duo of Sorokin and Varlamov, and last season made it unclear who the true starter is. Sorokin had back surgery this summer, and there are even rumors of some sort of conflict between him and Patrick Roy. But regardless, the Islanders' goaltending unit remains one of the strongest in the league. By bringing in Roy, the Islanders tried to solve another problem, their extremely low scoring output. No, by last year's Washington standards, it might still be okay, but in terms of the NHL overall, it's not. The last time the Islanders had a player who scored 40 goals in a season was 7 years ago. There are no snipers, and Matthew Barzal isn't one. Sipliakov? Maybe he's closer. The former Spartak player, along with Anthony Duclair, were the only additions to the club this summer. But again, both are likely to max out at around 25 to 30 goals each, and it's still unclear about Sipliakov. The team is set for a full season under Roy, and I think his time after being appointed head coach can be considered successful. He confidently led the team to the playoffs and gave Carolina a real fight. Last season, the Islanders were in the bottom third of the league in 5-on-5 play, both in goals and chances created, and their power play was similarly weak. If Roy can indeed instill his offensive style over the summer, we might see a rebirth of the Islanders. However, personally, I feel like Roy's resources are very limited to make that happen. And we're left with two teams that have pulled ahead in the division. The first is Carolina. After yet another relatively early playoff exit, the question wasn't whether someone had to leave, but who, either Rod Brind'Amour or Don Waddell. In the end, the general manager left while Brind'Amour's contract was extended. However, this summer saw what feels like the biggest roster turnover yet, and there's a sense that it made the Hurricanes weaker. I'm not counting the departures of Antti Raanta and Evgeny Kuznetsov from the NHL, nor Jake Guentzel's move to Tampa. The first two were of little use to the club, and with Guentzel, Carolina could have negotiated better. They had the capability. Add to that the departure of the entire Shea-Pesce defensive pair, not renewing Toivo Teravainen's contract, and the loss of Stefan Noesen, who was actually a top player for his salary. Tony DeAngelo likely won't be kept either. Now let's see who's going to replace these players. Instead of the most reliable defensive pair in the club, Shea-Pesce, Carolina has brought in Shane Gostisbehere and Sean Walker. Yes, they are much cheaper, but neither are stay-at-home defensemen, and calling Walker a two-way player is difficult. As a result, the only true defensive defenseman left is Jalen Chatfield, alongside Jakub Slavin and Dmitry Orlov, who will likely have even more defensive responsibilities placed on him. In the attack, all of Carolina's new acquisitions are cheap, and they've all joined the lower lines. William Carrier, Jack Roslovic, and even Tyson Jost, who has been bouncing between the NHL and AHL in recent years. Eric Tulsky was right when he said that the club needed around $108 million to satisfy the salary demands of all their desired players, which is simply impossible. Extending Seth Jarvis and Martin Necas is already a kind of success, and it's good that nothing had to be resolved with the other core players this summer, or the salary cap would have been in shambles. I wouldn't say Carolina failed this summer, but the team's direction feels a bit strange. Yes, they still have a solid bottom six forward group, and getting Carrier was a great move. But Carolina is clearly lacking a sixth player in the top six. Aho, Svechnikov, Necas, Jarvis, Kotkaniemi. And then who? Many predictions slot Bradley Nadeau into that spot, but that seems doubtful. He may be a top prospect, but in his only game last season, he managed to pick up a 9-3 rating against Columbus. And then there's the already mentioned defensive line, which is now much less focused on actual defense. In terms of goaltending, they have Frederik Andersen, who's good but not the most stable or healthy, and Pyotr Kochetkov, on whom they have high hopes. The depth of Carolina's attacking line has certainly diminished and is no longer at the level of a true contender. This brings up a logical option, a trade. A specific name would be Martin Necas, who requested a trade before the draft, and just because his contract was extended doesn't mean that's off the table. At least, I wouldn't be surprised by another move from the club, as it seems the roster is still incomplete. Meanwhile, they have less than $100,000 left in cap space. The finalist from the East New York Rangers. The team won the President's Trophy and put up a very good fight against Florida. Even in their last 3 games, they lost by only 1 goal. After such losses, there's usually a feeling that nothing needs to change. How do you make these Rangers even stronger? There's no real way. You just have to come back and try again next year. This can be said about almost any contender. Washington can afford to reshuffle their roster with 6 to 7 new players, but the Rangers don't have that option. The team's only significant acquisition this summer was forward Riley Smith, who bounced around in Pittsburgh last season and put up an unremarkable 40 points. He's being penciled into the top 6, and maybe he could have held that spot about 7 years ago in the newly assembled Vegas Golden Knights. But now, on a team that's a direct contender, that seems unlikely. Additionally, they brought in Sam Carrick for depth, though I don't fully understand the move. Carrick didn't always make Edmonton's lineup in the Stanley Cup, but here, for a small price, he'll fill the 4th-line center spot, so maybe it's fine. However, the losses for the Rangers are much more serious. Alex Wenberg, Barclay Goodrow, and Jack Roslovich combined, they had 18 playoff points, more than Panarin or Zibanejad. But now, all 3 are gone. Additionally, they said goodbye to veteran Blake Wheeler and defenseman Eric Gustafsson. The latter, in my opinion, was a mistake. Yes, the salary cap pressures the club, but the Rangers aren't in as dire a cap situation as, say, Carolina. What's left? Arguably the best goaltender in the world right now, Igor Shesterkin, who played the most brilliant goaltending series last season, even though he lost it. There's also the big 4 forwards, Artemi Panarin, Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, and Vincent Trocheck. Alexis Lafreniere remains, who made a significant leap in both the regular season and playoffs last year, and if he continues in that vein, he could easily hit 70 to 80 points. Philip Cheetil is back, though injuries disrupted his last season. Capo Caco is still around, getting perhaps his last chance. If he doesn't deliver, he's out. In defense, the main question surrounds captain Jacob Trouba, whom the club tried to trade this summer, but ran into difficulties. Additionally, the Rangers have several prospects on the horizon, and I'm not talking about Matthew Rempe, but rather Brennan Uthman or Adam Edstrom, who performed well in rookie tournaments. So, Peter Laviolette still has some resources to work with. The main problem for the Rangers, which has persisted for several years, is their 5-on-5 play. And despite having a magical power play and a strong penalty kill, the team consistently finds itself in the bottom third of the league in even strength goals. This was an issue under Gerard Gallant, and it's still an issue under Laviolette. I don't think the Rangers have gotten stronger, but that's not always easy for a contender. The club certainly has its headaches. Who will play in the top 6 alongside Kreider and Zibanejad? They need to sort out a new contract for Shesterkin, potentially make decisions about Trouba, not lose their power play edge, which provides a large portion of their points, and finally fix their 5-on-5 play. The Rangers remain a contender if only because their core combinations haven't changed. The team thrives on the 5-on-4 format, and all the key power play players are still in place. I doubt New York will have trouble in the regular season, but the playoffs are a different story. If nothing changes for the Rangers, the first team with a decent penalty kill will stop them in the playoffs. Friends, that wraps up this preview. I tried to cover all the changes in the NHL teams as thoroughly as possible, and now let's discuss it in the comments. What do you think? Will the wild card race once again be the most intense in the Metropolitan Division? Which of these 8 teams made the best moves this summer? And who, on the other hand, had a disastrous offseason? Do you have a favorite team among them? And how do you feel about the changes to their roster? In any case, write in the comments. I'd love to read your thoughts and join the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The Atlantic Division preview is coming up soon.